You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to continue our journey talking about slightly smaller businesses, the privately held ones, where the owner has their fingerprints all over everything in the business. And we're going to turn our attention to the exit game. And as many of you who have listened to my show lately, you know I'm doing a lot of work in that space, particularly on the buyer side, helping people who want to become entrepreneurs by acquisition deal with the generational transfer of wealth that's going on right now, the so-called silver tsunami. We got a lot of business owners who are ready to sell. They would like to exit, but there are a lot of moving parts in making that happen and happen well. My guest today is someone who's spent a good bit of his career in this space. His name is Jeff Getty. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Jeff, it's a little bit of a tradition here. Give us a quick flyover and sort of backstory on your journey, your career, and how you got into the work you're doing now.
Great, sure. Happy to do that. So I started out my career as a transactional tax attorney. When I got out of law school, started doing designing structures, sell-side business sales as a tax attorney, and eventually started to expand my scope to work with clients to prep their businesses and the business owners themselves beyond just the tax work to actually position the business for growth and to become a more attractive acquisition target. And then actually morph that practice to work with the owners themselves to be better prepared and be better sellers of the business. Worked at several different firms over my career, including several large financial institutions, and ended up most recently, I joined Callan Family Office, and I am now one of the two managing directors of the business and transaction advisory practice at Callan Family Office.
Nice. Well, as we were talking in the green room getting ready for this, one of the things that we both have familiarity with, I myself as a former banker and you now doing the work you do, entrepreneurs build up their businesses and they get up to some level of success, and then they begin thinking about a possible exit, only to realize what they've really created is an owner-centric platform that has little, if any, market value, because if they go away, the business goes away. And what are some of the basic considerations that people ought to be thinking about, Jeff, to avoid that stigma of being declared an owner-centric business?
Yeah, it's a big problem, and it's a great question or a great thread to pull on. And unfortunately, it's a very common one, right? You spend so much time as an entrepreneur building that business, and at inception, it really does have to be typically all about the entrepreneur. But as time goes on, as that business grows, one of the things the owner really has to start thinking about is, how do I make this business to be less about me? And first and foremost, as the business grows and as one starts to think about the ultimate exit, they need to start thinking about how do they make the business less about them and more about transferability. So they have to start positioning and thinking about it. How could someone come in and run this or take this over without me being there? So they really have to start looking at that business as an enterprise that with them not being in it. So the easiest way to view that would be, if I were a buyer, how could I step into your shoes as the entrepreneur without you being there at all? So I hand you the bag of money, so to speak, and can I step in and take this enterprise over? The easiest way, I think, to envision that is, do you have, for example, a management team that one could come in and work with immediately? to kind of take over. Some businesses aren't large enough to have a large management team. So are there some key employees, for example? Are there contracts in place with vendors and vendees? Are there things in the infrastructure that exist separate and distinct and apart from the owner entrepreneur that actually create an infrastructure or a chassis that a buyer could come in and actually take over? And that's just at a very high level to start thinking about what exists inside the business that's separate, distinct, and apart from the owner that actually would allow a buyer to come in and step into those shoes, if not immediately, over a relatively short period of time, that wouldn't be necessary to have the owner continue to manage, run, and oversee. Is probably the easiest way to look at it.
Yeah. And a lot of times people that start up their own businesses, it's not so much about a product or something as it might be a service. A very extreme example I'll give, I've got a friend who spent his whole life, he was a doctor of veterinary medicine, built up a private practice, had done quite well with it. And as he turned his attention to maybe retiring, stepping away, he wanted to put it up for sale. But the reality was, yes, he had a phone book of paying customers, but guess what? They came to him because they liked him as their pet doc. And when they heard he was leaving, they left.
Yep.
And poof went the business. And he literally ended up selling the equipment he had for fundamentally salvage value, and that's all he got out of it.
Yeah, I would call that its own version of a liquidation, right? A liquidation value business. And on the scheme of valuation and valuation methodology, that's the lowest level of valuation. How one would fix that, to rewind that, is if he knew he were doing that. And again, this is playing Monday morning quarterback, obviously. But if I were advising him like 3 years before he was pegged to exit, I would say, okay, here's how you make this a valuable, transferable business. Most likely, you would have to find a younger vet or a couple of younger vets that you would want to bring in to take over the business. You would slowly transition or introduce those younger vets to your client base, preferably, again, over, say, a 36-month window. You would start to introduce them into the practice. You would have them in the rooms with the patients, so to speak, and their owners. And there would be this transition period where people who take part of those services would start to meet the next quote unquote generation of owners, would get comfortable with that next generation of owners. And then that transition becomes less abrupt, right? It's not, hey, Joe Smith, the guy, is gone. It's Joe is slowly introducing in people that are taking over, and then it's less of an abrupt issue. Is it perfect? Would everybody stay? Maybe not, but there's at least a possibility a majority would stay. And if you were trying to sell that, to example, to a roll-up, a larger veterinary practice that was looking to buy up one, that stickiness of, hey, it's not just me leaving as the sole vet that's running everything. I actually have 3 or 4 other vets that work there. They would see that as, oh, it's not just Joe, it's these other people are there. There's going to be some percentage of patients and clientele that are going to stay. We'll pay for that because we know a certain percentage would stay. Overly simplistic way to look at it, but that's really the kind of mindset or methodology or process one would typically put into play in a situation like that to avoid that outcome.
Well, and, as I've worked with clients in this space, there are also some other elements in those businesses, things like process and procedure. If you're not structured with good, proven, repetitive process and procedure, you're basically doing one-offs every day for whatever your business may be, and that minimizes that transferable value that might be there.
For sure, right? And when you get down into the process of an actual transaction, as I'm sure you're aware, one of the things that buyers are going to want to see is exactly those items, right? As they go through their punch list and the due diligence process, they're going to want to see there are actually written process and procedures that are replicable and are utilized day in and day out. So it's not a one-off every time. It's, hey, this is our process book, so to speak, and this is how we do things. So again, the owner leaves, it's not everything's up in his or her head. There's written stuff that's done every time. owner becomes, and shall I say, an absentee owner is the best one. You don't need to be there day in and day out. And the management team or the employees can just run with things without them being there. One of the first questions I typically ask an owner as they're thinking about an exit and thinking about moving on, I ask them, well, when you take vacation, or do you take vacation? Can you go away for, say, 3 weeks at a time? And if you do, can you actually not take phone calls every day? Can you disappear for 2 or 3 weeks and not be in constant touch with the office? If the answer is no, I have to be in constant communication, that's a red flag. There's a problem. If they say, well, I don't, but I could, that's okay. That means it's probably transferable. There's an issue with them not being able to cut loose, but it's possible for them to cut loose. Two different issues, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But those are the types of things that a buyer would look for. And those are the types of questions they're going to ask as they evaluate a business as to whether or not they're interested, let alone pay a premium for it.
Flip side of that coin, I'll tell a quick story. I'm involved with a buyer right now who recently acquired a business, and all through due diligence, he kept hearing about the great structure, the leadership team that was already in place. The seller was supposedly already an absent owner, didn't have to be there much, and a lot of flexibility and all that. And so this buyer closed on the transaction around the 1st of May. And about 3 weeks ago, I was talking with him, and he said, hey, by the way, I'm going to be offline for the next 10 days. I went, what? And he said, my kid's doing a select sports event. We're traveling three-state area, and I've already, in a short period of time, affirmed and built my own confidence in the leadership team I've got. I told him it's all on them. I'm out. I'm going to be gone. Call me if you have to, but don't expect me to be bothering you every day. And sure enough, he took off for the 10 days. He got back, and I couldn't wait to ping him and say, how'd that go? How'd that work out for you? And he said, it was great. He said, every one of my hopes and expectations was fulfilled and affirmed. And he said, I told my guys when I got back, I really, appreciate them leaning in, and it was my way of expressing my faith and trust in what I've learned about them. And he said it actually really helped strengthen the notion and mitigate any fears they had about him wanting to come in and shake up the company, because his pitch was, I bought the company because it's a good one. I don't want to screw with it. I don't want to mess it up. We can talk about longer term change, but I don't have anything on my short list I want to dive into right now. I want you guys to keep operating. And so it was a great opportunity. But to your point, yeah, he just a few short months after buying the business affirmed and confirmed everything that was working as it was represented, and felt perfectly confident exiting and unplugging.
That's great. To be blunt, I don't typically see that. That's a great story.
That's
a little unusual too. That's awesome.
It is. It really was. But part of it, not to get off topic, but part of it, I think, speaks to the work we did helping him with his original due diligence, and just really having a really robust list of questions that he got into with the seller, and a very intentional plan to create succession from that seller and get all that stuff out of the seller's head and into the business, so that it was fully disclosed, fully transferable, and ready to go. And that's exactly what ended up happening.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Jeff, why do you think owner-founders have trouble with this thinking about how to let go, how to delegate to others, how to open up the grip on everything?
Yeah, well, whenever someone asks me a question, like, I always think, if I could go back to my undergraduate degree, I would have taken more psychology, or maybe abnormal psychology classes, and given you a better answer. I think it's the personality, right? So someone who is a true entrepreneur, they want to have their fingers in everything, and it's really hard to let go. And it's, their businesses tend to be all consuming. It's another child, right? right? And it's really hard to let go. And I see it typically if I work with a business owner through their early stage in their middle life cycle, their growth cycle. You definitely see it kind of starting there, and it just exacerbates as time goes on because they don't want to let go of certain things. And even as they grow and they add staff, they add management team, and as grow and things go on, they really have a difficulty letting go. So it's a logical progression that when it comes to that final stage of the business life cycle, the exit, the transition, transaction, whatever you want to call it, that's the most difficult part, right? This is the part where they really have to let go, and they just don't want to because they have a hard time psychologically seeing what's the next chapter. It's particularly difficult for that entrepreneur who this is the first time they've done it. I actually find it easier for the serial entrepreneur who this is their second, third, or fourth rodeo, so to speak, because they know there's something beyond it. So if I run into an entrepreneur who has never gone through this process, this is the first one. They started a business, let's say 30 years ago, and this is the one and only one they're going to do, and they're thinking they're going to sit on a beach afterwards or play golf for the rest of their life. I usually insist, and I really do insist, that they spend some time, probably not with me, but with someone I recommend. And we actually, interestingly enough, at the new format, we actually have two trained psychologists on staff that help with this, that spend time with entrepreneurs and talk to them about what day two might look like. Because I need those entrepreneurs to be able to see themselves, what they're going to be able to do when the dust settles and when the deal closes and when they're done working, right? When the new owner is done calling them with issues, typically 60, 90 days after the deal closes, what their life looks like. Because my experience is no one's playing golf 7 days a week. No one's sitting on a beach more than about 30 days, right? They have to have something, whether it's charity, starting another business, I don't care what it is. They have to have a vision of what they're going to spend their time on. If they can't see that, right? If they can't picture that, it's going to be that much more difficult to get them to action. I know this is a very long-winded answer to that question, but and where it manifests itself typically is as the deal progresses, they will typically start to create problems where they will not allow the deal to move forward. Like they'll arch their backs on certain things, and we'll start to see that deal start to fall apart because they will start to manifest it in unusual ways of, well, I knew I said I wanted to sell this business. I know I said I wanted X number of dollars. Now I really want X times two. Or I want some ridiculously unusual deal terms because they cannot see themselves in another light, in another version of themselves. So I really try to push them to, what are you going to do after this deal happens? Yeah. If they can't see that, I don't think that deal is going to really happen, or it's going to be very difficult to make happen. So that's a very big piece of that puzzle. But just as a general rule, that type of personality has a hard time letting go. It's helpful to let them see another thing to do. I think it's also very helpful to, just, hey, this is part of a normal cycle of a business. You buy it, you build it, you start it, you build it. There's a cycle, right? This is the logical end of the cycle. Now you got to figure out what else, the next piece of this, right? It's going to be another business. It's going to be something else. So that's the way I view it.
Yeah. And, part of this, you touched on a number of things, and I think it's all great. I think back, and my listeners have heard me talk about this in my early days in banking. I watched owners who went through the journey, start up, grow up, scale up, and turn into a real enterprise. And that was those were the success stories. But then there were those that got through those first 2 or 3 phases and then hit a wall.
Yep.
And the business, try as they might, and they would outwardly profess that they wanted to keep growing and expanding and building. But one thing after another would, fall off or fall apart and keep them held back. And in my humble observation, and I too am not a psychologist, but just watching and hearing, it was all about the owner's mindset for change. And, classic example is a lot of businesses, the only reason they turn into full-fledged enterprises either at a large regional or state or maybe even national or global level, is that the owner hits a wall and personally and doesn't realize that they're not suited to be the CEO of an enterprise.
Yeah.
They might be a wonderful idea guy, but executing on a day-by-day basis is not their forte. So they need to go out and recruit and hire a CEO, COO, chief of sales, whatever the role, and build that leadership team that can carry it forward. And they're not really abdicating anything other than certain tasks that might otherwise be on their plate. But what they're, for the greater good of the business, it's the right move to be making. And some people embrace that change better than others, and those who insist on not allowing that to happen inevitably just never get past that invisible wall.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring it up that way. I'm dealing with a client right now. It's actually his second business. He sold his first one, and he, younger guy, wasn't ready to stop. Started up another business and realized that he's a little burned out, right? He just never took time off between the two and started thinking maybe he really didn't want to start that second business. Maybe he jumped in too fast, but he's got a great idea and it's already starting to take off. So similar to kind of what you're talking about, I said to him, well, instead of shutting that down, perhaps what you should do, simple exercise, sit down with a piece of paper and write down those things that you love to do and those things you don't want to do. And those things you love to do, those are the things you keep on your plate. And those things you don't want to do anymore, they're the positions, the job descriptions, the things you need to hire people to do for you. And that's how you build out your management team for this next business, or the job descriptions of who has to do what, because you don't have to do those things. You've been successful. You can do this next enterprise differently. You can skip a couple stages ahead because you've got capital behind you, you've got investors behind you, because you have a success story to tell, right? You don't have to go through that scary first run you did before, and you can build that infrastructure to be successful in a different way and have that success work differently, so you can have that build out look a little bit differently. It's just a different way, kind of a different way, the similar way to what you were describing, that build that business that and build the infrastructure the way that works best for you. And I think ultimately that second business will grow faster and better than probably the first one did, because he has that flexibility this go around.
Yeah,
That's my opinion at this point. So,
well, and for him to take that advice and embrace it, I think, is an indicator of popular buzzword nowadays is emotional intelligence. That self-awareness to say, yeah, for the greater good of my business, this is what I need to be doing. My advisor or coach has told me that I need to think about, that's right. And yes, here's the list of things I just love to do. They're the things that do get me up in the morning, get me excited. Everything else, I'm going to find somebody to work it for me. And whether that rolls into one job description or two or three, that's variable, and you can decide at that point how you want to do it. It is interesting that so often the visionary skills that kind of are the hallmark of a good entrepreneur also become a hindrance to the long-term growth, because the entrepreneurs just get bored. They get an idea, they bubble it up, they get it going, and they go, okay, that's cool. What's next? Let's go do something else. And the business becomes almost its own kind of schizophrenia. There's, what did we do yesterday? Oh, I don't know. We're not doing that anymore. We're going to go do this. And, there's this frenetic dance that's going on about the direction that the business is going. How do you think owner-founders can discipline themselves, for that temptation?
That's a tough one. I would say first and foremost, surrounding yourself with, a good advisory team is always helpful. A good management team, that's a little bit trite. There's some good coaches out there. I really do encourage clients that are kind of stuck or who have that mindset to find a good executive coach, because they can definitely help keep them on track. The other thing I think has been really helpful, I didn't necessarily see this when I was younger, but I definitely see it today. Advisory boards, particularly well set advisory boards, are exceptionally helpful because it's an outsider's viewpoint and it's finding good ones, though. There are a distinct difference in my experience with the types of advisory boards people pull together. Option A would be, well, I have like friends I pull in from the community that I like, and we're kind of get together and we chit chat, and not very helpful. I mean, actually finding people that are going to hold their feet to the fire and bring real value to the table, exceptional, right? They can really, really, really objectively look at things. Typically, they have experience in that field or similar fields. I think they're great, and they can be exceptional to make things happen. So, independent third parties can hold their feet to the fire. It's sometimes tough as a paid advisor to do that at times because you can get fired for being too tough. But, that's, sometimes the tough conversations are important. So there's a couple different avenues, but I think any of those are good. But I also believe that good entrepreneurs sometimes can have good introspection too. That can be a little more challenging. You don't always find them that are willing to do it, but outsiders that are willing to have a backbone and say things are good and helpful. That is a challenge though, because the personality's there, and those personalities, what makes them good idea people and good entrepreneurs typically makes them a challenge as an operator, which is exactly what you said. And
Right.
it's tough. It is.
And I think there's an undeniable truth in there somewhere that well-run businesses that actually increase their own size and growth year over year over year, if you start studying what they do, there's some form of discipline, either whether it's financial discipline and budgets or process, or even a kind of a product discipline. They're sensitive to and keenly aware of the need to map a course and stay on it for a little while, get the output from it. And then, you can shift as the market shifts. You can explore, you can innovate, you can do those things. But to have such a wildly varying approach to the business that I have known entrepreneurs where it feels like things change every day. And that's not a good indicator of the long-term success of that business.
Yeah, on a kind of related note, one of the issues that I see that's particularly challenging when we see businesses at times when they're thinking about going to market and they get a valuation and there's a value gap. I want, pick a number, $20 million for my business, and the valuation comes in at 15. So there's a $5 million value gap. And so the question becomes, how do you close the value gap, right? Well, you have to grow. Okay, fair enough. And there's this immediate knee-jerk reaction to, quote unquote, sell more stuff. Okay, so how do you sell more stuff? Well, I'll just add salespeople. Okay, and that might not be the right choice because, okay, add more salespeople. What does that mean? You have to manufacture more stuff, more stuff to the production line. What is that actually going to do? You have to think through all the different things this might impact. So just selling more stuff might not get you there. The other big one I see sometimes, we'll just make an acquisition. Probably the most dangerous thing I see clients doing is bolt-on acquisitions. Not that they don't work, but understanding how long it takes to get the return on an acquisition. And it's usually not that they can't see, if I buy this firm, that is a good synergy. I can get a good return off of this. That's not typically the issue. The issue typically comes down to a cultural integration, right? The value's there, it's just integrating it in. It might be 18, 24 months to see it. If my value gap I want to close in a year, an acquisition probably isn't going to get me there. That's probably more of a 24 to 36 month window. So, again, entrepreneur knee-jerk reaction is, well, I can just grow to this way and I'll get the return I want. Pump the brakes, think this through. That's probably not the way that's going to happen. Like closing value gaps like that probably is not the way to do it. There are other ways to do it. It's probably not that way. So having them listen and understand that can be a big challenge at times. Because there is a knee-jerk reaction.
And to your point on that value gap, there are schools of thought that like to talk about intrinsic value in businesses. When you take a target company and say, let's think about a transaction to hand this over to another party. There's an assessment that can be made that can look at all the various critical elements of the business, and you can plus or minus intrinsically on how that could help the value or take from the value. And then that can become a heat map of that next, 24 to 36 months that the owner may want to focus on. And those might be very fixable elements that they just haven't taken the time to address. I'm thinking of an entrepreneur that I know that was a successful buyer about a year ago. And one of the first things he did, he looked at pricing and felt that the seller had the business priced. I mean, the transactional prices they were offering to the market was too low. Mm-hmm. And the one change he made, didn't change his team, didn't change his actual delivery, but he did change his price 40%, and he lost no customers doing it.
Wow. Well.
And he actually picked up some clientele that were the higher end in the market, and that philosophically wouldn't talk to the company at the lower price point. Now that their prices were higher, they said, "Oh, you must be the real deal, so we'll use you." Price psychology at its best.
It always comes back to when I tell people, and look, I don't do valuation work for a living, but I tell clients in its simplest format, right? What's your business worth? What's worth what somebody's willing to pay, right? That's an obvious answer. But what a business is really worth, in my opinion, is a buyer is going to pay you at a premium, not what the business is worth to you as the seller, but what it's worth to them by what they can take with it and what they can do with it, right? So it's not what you do with it, it's what they see they can do with it. That's the value. That's the delta, right? That's what they're willing to pay you for.
Right.
And that's a hard concept for most clients to understand. So you almost have to, in a sales process, in my opinion, you almost have to show a buyer that it's not that my business is bad, it's that there's gas left in the tank, right? Like, I've taken it to this point and it's a great business, but here's what someone could do with it that I just chose not to do. Like, geographically, I didn't feel like growing it to here, or I didn't feel like putting on this product line, or I couldn't do these things that you could do, right? And that's where you really get the premiums. That's as simple as I can put it for most sellers, so they can get their head around, because valuation and valuation methodology spins, in my opinion, sellers up into so many different directions. And the part I always get an inside chuckle to is when I sit down with a potential seller for the first time, and they will pull out a sheet of paper and they'll say, "Well, I went on the internet," which is one of my favorite introductions to a client. "Well, I went on the internet and I looked up, and the average multiple in my industry is X of my EBITDA. My EBITDA is Y, so therefore I should sell for this." And I'm like, okay, well, if valuation's a little more complex than that, but nobody actually does valuations just based on that average multiples of EBITDA. It's a marker. I'm not saying it's not, but no one's going to pay you based off of that number. Trust me, that's not exactly how it works. So anyway, that's a little bit of feel, but.
Well, and to the point about opportunity that may be there and the seller has just not pursued it, I would venture to guess in the last year that I've been doing this buy-side work that I'm doing, I think every other seller we've probably talked to has expressed some notion of, yeah, I'm sure there's upside opportunity. I'm just tired. I'm not interested in pursuing it. I don't want to complicate my life by going out there or going to that segment that I never did before, or turning on a digital marketing campaign because I don't know how to spell digital marketing, whatever the reason. And not being critical of those people at all. The point being, it's a lifestyle choice those owners have made. And now they're saying, I'm just ready. So let's get this put to market. Let's get it closed and I'll move on. And that creates very ripe and juicy opportunities for new buyers to move in and take advantage of all of that. So,
yeah, that's
yep.
exactly it. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I think we're about up on time. I really appreciate you sitting in and offering your expertise. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
Sure. So a couple different ways. Probably the best way, I'll just give you my cell number. I'm always available on that, 412-303-4521, where my email is jgetty, Getty, at Callan, CALLANFO.com. Either way, please reach out. I'm happy to chat with anybody. Love to talk. Love to learn about your business. And just give me a holler. Happy to chit chat for a little bit and see what you got going on. See if we can find a way to work together.
That's great. That's great. Well, as always, folks, we'll have that info in the show notes. You can hop down and take a look at that and get a hold of Jeff if you're interested in talking to him about your situation, or if you know somebody that could use that help. Always a great opportunity. So this is the point of the show. I'd like to remind you, we have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives. We're rocking and rolling. We clipped past episode 300 a couple of months ago and on our way to 400. So please join us, and I think you'll appreciate the content we've been able to pull together. And by the way, if you have an idea for a guest or know someone that you would like to hear from, let me know, or you may be interested in sitting in. Be happy to talk with you about that. All my contact info is likewise in the show notes, so reach out, let me know. But with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.